So we've talked about EMI, we've talked about CSOP, we've talked about unapproved options. Next up is growth shares. Growth shares are very different to option plans that we've talked about, because they are a direct award of equity. You are getting shares up front. They're also much talked about by the VC community, the investor community, and by start and scale-ups. And I think we really want to go through this video, explain to you opportunities, design plans, pitfalls, and what to think about, particularly if you're an EIS qualifying business as well.
Okay, so let's start off with that first point that you raised. What are the opportunities that are presented through the implementation of a growth share scheme?
So when we talked about EMI, we talked about working time requirements. 25 hours a week, 75% of working time. You can issue anyone with growth shares. There is no such working time requirement. It's a direct equity award. And a classic growth share structure will have a hurdle. Yeah. So it will incorporate a hurdle into a class of shares, and any growth in value that a company achieves up to the hurdle, a growth shareholder will not participate in. But once that hurdle is achieved, once you leap over that hurdle, the growth shares start to participate in value. Now, that's a good thing. It can align objectives from a stakeholder, investor, employee perspective, because you're striving to achieve a certain goal, and when you can achieve that goal, everyone participates in the value. That's a good thing. But yeah, as you and I know, there are a lot of tax bits and pieces that you have to consider.
Yeah. So let's touch on that for a moment. What are some of the tax benefits that attach to the implementation of a growth share scheme, and maybe specifically around how you attain a valuation right at the get-go of implementing a growth share scheme? Yeah.
So when you hold equity, and upfront you pay market value for that equity, then any growth in value jumps up to capital gains tax. That's CGT 20%. Again, we've talked about it before, that beats a bonus, that beats an unapproved option, which are taxed in general at income tax rates. You then mentioned valuation. Valuation in the growth shares world is really, really interesting. So for HMRC approved plans like EMI, like CSOP, you're valuing minority interests. And from HMRC's perspective, based on historic case law and established practice, you can take into account, in general, information that's in the public domain. There's a fairly tried and tested way of agreeing those valuations of HMRC, and the information you can take, what's on Companies House, what's in the media on the company, what's on Crunchbase, bring that together and put together a valuation submission. With growth shares, it's completely different. You're still valuing a minority interest, by the way, so you'd think that the same principles might apply, but HMRC and the advisor world seem to be moving towards the fact that growth shares need to be valued on a forward-looking basis. Yeah. And as you and I know, forward-looking valuations are a little bit difficult and a little bit challenging, let's say, compared to the classic EMI and CSOP valuation. I should say as well, you can't agree the value up front of HMRC. So again, there's a risk there. When you agree a valuation of EMI and CSOP up front of HMRC, it almost gives a tick. Look, your valuation approach makes sense. The tax benefits of EMI and CSOP will be locked in as long as you behave within that valuation. With growth shares, you can't do that.
So it makes it even more important that attaining a valuation and having that on file to ensure that you've correctly valued that class of share is going to be absolutely fundamental, not only for the relevant individual, but if we fast forward to a future diligence event, that's going to be imperative so that we ensure that actually the tax profile of it is outlined right from the get-go, and that you don't end up with any kind of nasty tax consequences as a direct result.
Absolutely, and that can apply to both the employee and the employer. Yeah. So from an employee side, you're clearly looking for capital gains tax treatment, but if you've acquired equity at undervalue, in theory you've got an upfront income tax charge. I should say that with growth shares, you will need to pay something upfront as you are buying shares. You're not being awarded an option. An option's a gift. Shares are a thing. They're a physical thing. You get a share certificate. They belong to you. You go into the cap table. So you will have to pay up front. The classic situation we see with growth shares values, people going, well, the hurdle's not attainable, so it's nominal value. Historically, that may have flown with some workings, but the change to forward-looking methodology means that essentially for any growth share, you design your scheme, you pick your hurdle, you forecast out from inception, so when the growth share awarding, to exit, and you have to, scenario plan, what are the probabilities perhaps of certain outcomes, and then you have to bring that back to present day through some kind of discounting. That, in many situations that we see, put some value in the growth shares at day one. It's really interesting. It's probably the first time I've ever seen HMRC take a vaguely commercial approach to something. They say to advisors, well, you're putting in place a growth shares plan. You're spending money on opening up the articles and introducing a new class of shares into your articles, on redesigning your waterfall so that growth shares participate at a certain point. Why are you going to that trouble if the shares aren't worth anything to somebody up front? So to me, it's almost an exercise on working out, like, how much are people going to pay up front. So people are going to have to put their hands in their pockets and put money out for shares. There is no guarantee of a return. So there's a bit of a, and also there's the joys of things like tax elections you can make when you acquire a growth share. If you don't make certain tax elections and you don't pay unrestricted market value, then part of the future growth of that equity value may be subject to income tax, NICs, and that's when the employer's NIC kicks in as well. Right. So you've got a potential cost for an employer there too.
So really what we're saying here is the valuation is going to be absolutely key when you're determining your growth share mechanism. Gone are the days now where we're going to be able to attain a kind of par valuation for those because the hurdle that you're setting is so far out. And therefore due care and attention is needed to kind of ascertain that valuation.
Absolutely. Valuation on file critical for future diligence will get looked at. We know it's getting looked at. We've got valuers who we speak to regularly saying to us, you know, the world of growth shares is getting ever more complicated. Still, by the way, and I don't want to make this sound like I'm saying, oh, don't do growth shares. There is a great space for growth shares in the world of incentivization. And I still think they can be offered in a valuable way to incentivize the right group of people. But I think from what we're saying is go into it with your eyes wide open. One other thing I would mention is that the interaction between growth shares and venture capital schemes can be quite interesting as well. And we see that a lot. You know, your articles are getting opened up to introduce growth shares. Let's not make a mess of the existing EIS position, for example, but introducing a growth share, because there are certain bits of EIS law that naturally don't sit as compatible with growth shares. Absolutely can be navigated, by the way, absolutely can be navigated. We know that. We know the ways of working them in, but be clear. It's not a slam dunk. It's not straightforward. Work with an advisor. Work with the individual receiving the growth shares, and just stepping back, make sure that the growth shares plan is right for the recipients, for the company, and for investors as well.